I wound up the way I wound up, which is great. Now, here's the funny thing. If I have to believe that, then also other people wound up the way they wound up. How can I be a booger to them if they're just wound up that way?
Hello and welcome to The Secret of My Success, the podcast where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling life. I am your host, Erin Curran. On today's episode, I am speaking with Steve Krivda. Steve is a coach. He is a man of God. Steve is also a motivational speaker, which allows him to transform lives in a short amount of time. Coach Steve is most proud of being the husband of his best friend, Danielle, and father to Andrew and Tyler, his two sons. Today, I have Steve Krivda on with me. Steve, thank you so much for coming.
Oh man, this is my honor and privilege to be here. Thank you, Erin.
So I'd like to start out the conversation by asking if there's like a time or a situation in your life where things, if you experienced a large shift or some sort of an upset, or maybe it was even just changing a context that really made a difference in your life that's created kind of a before and an after. Is there something in particular you'd like to share?
Totally. Back in about 2013, I found myself in a place where I thought I was happy. Like things felt pretty good in life. It wasn't like I had a whole lot to complain about, but I felt like there was something missing in my life. And so I was kind of walking through life automatically, if that makes sense. Like I just felt myself I knew exactly what life was going to be like. And I woke up every day and went to work and I love my job. That's not what I mean. But I felt like it was a really weird unhappiness type of thing, which is different than not being happy. Like it's that missing space. You know what I mean? And I remember my buddy called me up. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing this week?" I'm like, "I don't know. What's up?" He goes like, "I'm picking you up Tuesday and we're going to go for a ride." I'm like, "Okay." And I hung up the phone. I never even asked him why. I just trusted him. And it turned out to have a conversation that was different than any conversation I've ever had in my life. Up until that point, I was a very to-do person. Like if there's something going on, I just do something different and hoping some sort of result would be different. And it just really wasn't. Like there was these short-term feel-goods, right? And so I think what was interesting was in hindsight, when I look back before this transformation, I can see how I was with people. So you get the after Steve. The before Steve was not a very nice guy, and I didn't realize it. I was brought up in southern New Jersey in a very small town, and it was kind of one of those things where you fought to get what you wanted. In order to get respect, you took it. You didn't earn it. You didn't have a conversation. You just basically intimidated somebody, and so if you hear it, it's not really respect; it's more fear. And I had just walked through life that way because it was, at that point in time, it was working. I was married. Danielle and I were on our second conversation about divorce. At that point in time, we had two boys, Andrew and Tyler. And so Tyler was, 2010, he was 3, and Andrew was 5. So to contemplate divorce of 2 boys was a very scary conversation. And I'm like, well, what do we need to do to fix it? And so during this, my buddy picks me up. We go to this event, and he just showed up for the weekend. And what I saw was very interesting in how I was sitting in reaction mode all the time. Like I was waiting to react. Like people were out to get me, and I had to say what I had to say in order to get what I wanted. Didn't matter what I said. If it was a truth or not, I just validated the non-truth. So I was able to reason myself into anything I needed to do to get what I wanted to get in my life. And I realized when I look back, I had no friends at that point in time. All of my dad stopped talking to me. My brother stopped talking to me. None of my in-laws, they tolerated me because I was married to their daughter. And then you can hear also that with Danielle is, we were on our way out. We just didn't know what to do. I had to do some looking to see, who am I? What's going on in my life? And who is this automatic robot that's walking around the planet? And so it's very predictable too. Like if something happened, this is how I always reacted. If that happened, this is how I always reacted. And so it's a very inauthentic way of living life, which I go a lot into when I'm having conversations with people. And so what was interesting, Aaron, when I realized that I had 4,000 masks that I was wearing, it was a no wonder that I was unhappy because I didn't even know who I was in each individual moment. Then I had to remember all those people. And once I pulled all those masks off, I realized that I'm not an angry person. I'm not, I mean, you know me, I'm a tall guy. I'm not little. I'm not an alpha. Like I'm not this big ape that I was pretending to be. And I'm just a big cuddly teddy bear that just loves people. And I was always afraid to let that come out because I was always taught, not necessarily so much from my parents, but in the environment that I grew up in, that when you're that way, people will take advantage of you, take things from you, they'll steal from you and do everything that they need to get from you. So you have to do it first. And when I realized that that was stifling my own happiness and being powerful in the world, I had to take a step back and go, well, what if I actually showed up as me? What if I just showed up as happy, fun Steve, that this guy that's been dying to come out for all these years? What was interesting was I showed up that way. And I remember both my in-laws. And by the way, when I say what I'm going to say, I created this environment. So like, this is not their doing. I came home and I was like, man, I am so fired up about life. And I was like, I'm so sorry for the jerk that I've been to you guys, man. This is really crazy. And so I kind of went through that whole conversation with them. And I said, so this marks the day that this is the guy that you get to see. This is me. And I remember both of them said in fact, all three of my in-laws, and my brother too, said the same thing. Yeah, we'll see how long this lasts. And like as soon as it was said, like I said, it wasn't their doing. It was me. I did that. When they said that, my heart broke because then I realized what I did and who I showed up for them as a very unreliable, vindictive person that was just selfish. And so when I saw that, I was like, man. And I don't think they expected me to apologize. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, did I create an environment that you can't even see that this is what's happening and this is who I am. And so cool. I'm just going to keep showing up as me and we'll see what happens. And it took about 1.5 years for a few, and it took another one about 3 years to really come around to see that, all right, I've, went through the checklist for them. I don't know what that checklist is like. I'd like to know what it is.
The checklist for the other person that you finally...
that we put people through in order to be able to trust them, like once they do something not nice.
Yeah. Wow, man. Like I never knew that about you because like I've always known the really kind, generous, open, authentic Steve. Mm. And I can really get the world of coming from that space of constantly being defensive and offensive, defensive, just really coming from a space where you're boxed in behind these walls and there is like an order to behind everything that you do.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And I can relate because for the longest time, like one of the things I got that was most powerful as I've been going through my journey is the way I looked at the world. And it still sneaks up on me. I have to be very conscious that it's there. It never goes away.
Yeah.
Is the space I have been coming from was the world is dangerous.
Mm.
And if the world is dangerous, then I'm going to do whatever I can to stay protected and stay behind. And you're never going to know the real me. Nobody else shows the real them either. So, I'm just playing the same game that I think everybody else is playing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like when you come at life thinking, like as you were saying, it's a dog eat dog, kill or be killed kind of a world. Yeah. And I'm just doing what everybody else is doing to make sure that I get mine. I've got to stick up for me. Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm. You spot on.
And what I get is like one of the things that I heard is fear and respect were conflated. They were like mushed together and confused. Mm-hmm. And What's life like when you think that respect equals fear?
Man, as soon as you said what's life like, I knew that I felt the question coming, and it actually made my heart stop for a second. So how do you describe that? It's the fear thing. It's such an illusion to respect, and it's because people are afraid to be around you. And when they are around you, it's better to just say yes to avoid the Hulk that shows up, so to speak. And you had mentioned something earlier in it, and something I can add in for anybody that's listening. The reason I was that way is because I was so insecure about myself. Like, this is what people like about me, so I was afraid to show up as me, because what if they don't like that guy? So like that fear and intimidation was working. We talk about, this is funny. We talk about the creating the fear is that I used to say I'm great at disputing people. I was an arguer. I argued with people. And in the argue, it was just to prove myself right. And and the reason I won so much is because I just wouldn't stop until the person would say something like, there's just no talking to you anymore. And I'll be like, that's because I'm right. And then they would be like, and then I'll be like, all right, cool. I win
I
again.
win.
Yep, I win again. And I win. I won a whole lot of unhappiness is what I won. That was my prize. But yeah, to that fear and that overlap of fear and respect, I don't really think it's probably not even right. It's probably more of a smash where they hit each other. And fear is not respect. Fear is you do as I say, or there's going to be consequences. Respect is allowing somebody to be expressed as themselves. And then it's really interesting because I didn't understand that. Is that when I started allowing people in my life to be themselves instead of trying to constantly, correct them or fix them or whatever I was going through my mind, it was interesting on how they also shifted. And it allowed them to be, I guess, for lack of a better word, authentic with me. And all of a sudden now there's this mutual respect, like, so giving the respect instead of demanding it. That's an interesting question. I'm going to hang out with that even after we're finished here. It's a really interesting question.
Well, we've got some time to explore it. So if something else
Yeah,
comes up for you, let me know.
it probably will.
Yeah. One of the favorite things, it's an idea that I love, and it's this idea Einstein once said the first decision you have to make is whether the universe is friendly or not.
Yeah.
And
Oof.
it really is true, because like what you were saying, you came home and you're on fire and you're like, hey guys, I got it. I know I've been a jerk and this is why, and I'm not doing that anymore. And they're all like, yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you trained these people. We all train the people around us to dance with us the way we choose to dance. And then all of a sudden one day I get this bright idea and I'm coming home and I'm like, hey, guess what? And everybody else is going, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Because it's a combination of these are the people that have trained me, and these are the people that I have trained.
Yeah.
And so, very often we're invested in the environment staying the same because even though it's uncomfortable, it's familiar.
Right. Yeah, man.
And it's like that familiar we mistake very often for security, for safety.
Yeah.
But you could be killing yourself while you're in that kind of a space, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We talk a lot in the personal development space. We talk about comfort zones, and I've completely eliminated those from my conversation. I go from the unknown to the known now, because even the stuff that like, goodness gracious, how many people are just uncomfortable all the time because they're just afraid of the world, right? And I was one of those people, just very cynical, and everybody's always out to get me. My mantra when I met my wife is, I don't trust people. That's just the way it is. I said, so we're together, we'll get there. What an I'm so grateful she stayed around after that statement. It's like, man, who is this guy? And so like when I take a look at that and I go, I don't remember where I was going with that. Something you had mentioned, something to turn that wheel. Safety and the unknown versus the known is that we get so it's such an interesting conversation. I had this last night actually with a group of people that I'm working with, and we were talking about. I said, so fear of the unknown, like just by a show of hands, who's had a taste of it? I was trying to be kind, right? And everybody puts their hand up. I'm like, awesome, that's wow, all right, cool. So we're all in the same boat, beautiful. So curious, what's in your unknown? And everybody had an answer. And I'm like, well, if you already know what's in the unknown, well, isn't that the known? All of a sudden, now you're like, all right, so where are we going with this? I'm like, so how did you know to put that there? How did you know to be afraid of something that's not occurring at all, but you're predicting it? Like, how did you predict it? And then all of a sudden now the clicks are starting to happen. It's like, oh, okay, so I turned the unknown to the known from a knowledge that okay, so knowledge came from an experience. Bingo. All right, great. So when did you have that? And when did you create that moment in time? And who's showing up there? Is it you, or is it some act that you're putting on? Or are you trying to be safe? Or what's happening here? And it's interesting to watch when somebody catches that. It's like, man, I'm like, so let me ask you this question. And this is one of my absolute favorite questions to ask, whether it's a group or a one-on-one person I'm working with. I'm like, so stop for a moment. And they go, okay. I usually wait a couple seconds and I go, we need to talk. And they go, oh. Sometimes they go, oh. Or they go, oh, about what? I'm like, so what's your reaction? Like, well, I wouldn't really care. Or I'd be super scared. I'm like, yeah, but how do you know? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how do you know? All I said was we need to talk. It's like 4 words. I'm like, and you created this whole existence of a conversation and you don't even know what I'm going to say. So I think what was interesting was I said, so in the we need to talk, I'm like, I'm not a lottery player, but how do you know that I'm not calling you to say, I just hit the lottery and I remember you needed money. I was getting ready to send you a check. Like, oh, I never really thought about that. I'm like, I know. So who trained you to think that those 4 words are doom and the world is ending? They're like, that's a good question. I'm like, so you see how automatic and predictable we are. Mm-hmm. Or just so it's like, it's really incredible. And then when we start noticing that's their homework, by the way, for the next week, is to start noticing. I'm like, don't change anything. Just notice when somebody looks at you, cut you off in traffic, or your husband or wife or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whomever comes home and you hear the key go in the lock or the beep, beep, boop, boop, boop. Like, what shows up for you? And I'm like, I know for me, before I learned all this stuff, instant anxiety. And I was like, what's going to happen over the next 20 minutes in our conversation? Like, what kind of a day did Danielle have? Or when I'm coming home, I wonder if she's going to accept that I've had a rough day and I'm going to come in with this rough day on me. Right. So it's like, we're walking around almost like we're waiting for something to happen all the time. And if you look, it's, if it's say it's 1 o'clock right now, we're never at 1 o'clock. We're always at like 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock or 2028. It's so far off into the future that we're just missing life. I don't know how we got there, but you said something.
Well, that's actually one of the things I love about these conversations is we just sort of meander around and then go back and pick up threads. So absolutely, because you were referring earlier to like being an automatic robot in your life.
Yeah.
And so now here you are working with people and pointing out to them how they're being automatic in their lives. Mm-hmm. Like, you really have no space to be able to control life from the future or from the past. The only access we have is in the choice that we make up here. And if the choice that we make up here or in here is based on a view of what we think is in front of us, and what we think is in front of us is determined by filters that we don't even know we have. We're like 3 or 4 steps away from any semblance of knowing what's truly going on.
Yeah.
But we're pretending
Hmm.
like we know everything, because I know for me, my job title has always been super appropriate, because for the last 15, 20 years of my life, I've been the controller.
Oh, wow. That's
I'm
awesome.
an accountant and I usually am the controller for the company. And I am really good at trying to control the outcome and my future. And I've been a horrible boss because I already know the answer. I'm just coming to you to let you know that the way you're doing it isn't correct. And I'm waiting for you to
Mm.
show up in my world so that we're on the same page.
Yes. And you have to show up in your world as a certain inside the box person.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're going toe to toe.
Well, because if you start thinking for yourself, you're putting my vision at risk.
Right.
And I already
Hear
know
you.
where we're going. Like, there's no contribution inside of that space.
No, not at all.
I was not fun to work for.
Yeah.
Um, and I can only imagine. There were a couple of opportunities, a couple of spaces in my life where people have shown up, and I'm like, God, you are horrible to work with. And then I kind of look, because from my perspective, my personal philosophy is the environment is a reflection of the self. And it took me a while to
Mm.
really understand what that means.
Yeah.
And what that means is the person who's standing in front of me, if they're pissing me off in some way, it's rarely about them. I had somebody DM'd me this morning, an old friend of mine. I really haven't had many in-depth conversations with her in a while, but we started connecting again through social media as I'm posting about the podcast. And, when you post about a podcast that's personal development, people start asking, for advice.
Right.
And she was like, so, what do I do about this situation at work? And I'm like, well, what's your contribution? No, no, no. It's about her. It's this person. She's, arrogant and she has an attitude. And I'm like, well, but what do you bring? And she's not understanding at all, because it really takes a serious shift in how you view the world. It really is challenging to get, because I used to conflate responsibility and blame.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody would say, Aaron, you're responsible for your life, I would think that they meant that I was at fault. I was to be blamed for it.
Yeah.
Not entirely off base, but also not really an empowering conversation.
No.
When I really get that if I'm being a jerk to you, you're probably going to be a jerk back. If I want you to stop being a jerk, I need to stop being a jerk. I can't try to force you through fear to do what I need you to do in this moment, and then next week come back and expect you to actually show up, because you don't know when I'm going to flip that switch and decide that you're a liability.
Right. And it's funny that you just said that. How mine would show up as passive aggressive.
Mm.
I was the king. I'm pretty sure I had a crown at one point in time.
Oh, really? A
Passive
tiara?
aggressive a-hole. Yeah, I was a big princess is what I was. And it was really kind of interesting because people waited for it. They just waited for me to be that way. They were waiting for me to test my integrity. They were waiting for me to be late again. They were waiting for me to blow up. They were waiting for the snide comments. They were just waiting for it. And I was like, man, at that point in time, I would have said this. So no wonder they didn't like me. I wouldn't like me either. I was a jerk. Jeez. So yeah, it's interesting. I like that you said, what's your contribution to it? It's probably might be a little bit nicer when I say, well, how are you responsible for the situation? It's a little harsher. I do like what's your contribution to it. It's a little bit nicer. And like, what do you mean? I'm not responsible for that. It's all them. I'm like, all right. So, okay. All right. So when did it start?
Mm.
And it started here when they said this. And I'm like, cool. So what did you say? Like, what did you say? I told him to go pound sand. I'm like, oh, and then they responded back, how? And now you guys have been in a 5-year argument about something that didn't even matter.
Yeah.
And you said things that are mean, and now you're mean and mad at each other.
It takes a little while to talk people down because, one of the things that I think is really key is to remember that whatever our reactions are, whatever our automatic, those sleepwalking kinds of ways of being, whatever they are, it was all designed in an effort to protect us from something.
Yeah.
And if you aren't really curious about the source and you aren't doing anything about it, then it doesn't matter how enlightened you become, how smart you make yourself, how magnanimous or generous or friendly or fun.
Or how many books you've read.
Right. How many courses you've taken. It doesn't matter. None of that stuff is for anything. And so part of how I've tempered my conversation from trying to force people to see the error of their ways is, softening the vernacular and asking about contribution as opposed to responsibility, precisely because I remember my visceral reaction to somebody asking me what my responsibility was. Like, I mean, what the hell do you mean?
How are you at fault here, Aaron?
It's all their friggin' fault. Like go talk to them, fix them, and this will all go away.
Right.
Well, yeah. How many other places does it show up in your life exactly the same way?
Man, everywhere. It was really funny last night. Just had a great conversation. I think there was 8 or 9 of us. And so I said, we're talking about the predictability and how we are and how we're showing up and how we're just so inauthentic. And I said, all right, let's look at it like this. Earlier in the conversation, I said, who are you? And you named all these labels. We agree that they're labels, right? Mom, dad, boss, fun, like still a label. And while it's a quality, still a label of who we are in the moment. But we're not always fun, though, so that may or may not work. So that's fun, too. So it was, and I said, when did this start? And I said, I didn't hear who said it, but somebody unmuted and said, when I was a kid. I was like, oh, cool. So if I was working with you, I would say, well, about when? And you'd probably say like 8, 9, 10, somewhere. It doesn't really matter, but the age. And I would say, well, what happened at that time? And you would tell me what happened. And I go, cool. So in that moment, how did you react? And I reacted this way. I'm like, so in that moment in time, you developed a new character of you. You just put on an act because in that moment you were threatened. You put on this another mask, and then it worked. It worked for, at that point in time, 3.5 decades. So for the last 3.5 decades, that's how you show up in that moment. When that happens, when that occurs in your life, your character goes, oh, my turn, hold on. Okay, here I am. How do you need me? And I said, and then you show up that way. And I said, it's not a right or a wrong thing. It's not good or bad. It's what's been working to get what you've got. However, if you want to get something different, we have to take a look at, like you were saying, we've got to be able to investigate. So it's interesting, Aaron, this personal development space is so powerful in the moment of just suck it up, buttercup, see the fear and face it and crush it. You'll just walk through it and everything will be great. And I'm like, well, it might be good for like this really short-term moment, but what are the consequences you're not seeing from it? Like if I bust through this fear barrier and I'm like, the heck with it, I'm just going to do it anyways. And I'm having all this, like you were talking about, the visceral reaction as I'm doing this thing. Well, guess what? I just solidified my actual fear that I was looking to avoid in the beginning. So next time that shows up, my mind's going to go, I don't remember what happened last time, but it felt really, really bad. So let's just not do this. So make up an excuse and make it quick.
It's absolutely true. I know recently one of my coaches was trying to she wasn't trying to force me. It felt like I was being forced. And the truth of the matter is, when we started, she asked what my goals were, and I gave her 3. And as we went down the path, two of them I was doing okay with, and this third one, like terror was coming up.
Mm.
And I was like, no, 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 no. We need to back off of this third one. And to her credit, she continued to push, but not so much that it cemented, like re-cemented the wall. It was, all right, I'm going to keep pushing because like there's a natural resistance that comes up. If we're talking about, like, I know you were saying you have shifted from comfort zone to known and unknown. But if we use like the comfort zone kind of a model, if I'm coming to the edge of my comfort zone, and as I'm approaching the unknown outside of my comfort zone, I'm starting to feel the fear.
Mm.
There's a usefulness to pausing and checking in.
Right on.
Because, like you say, if I'm just going to try and push through and force, I've been forcing myself my entire life. Like, got the control facade. Like, I can be the angry person and just like really rip people's faces off and push through and get to where I want to go. But it doesn't serve me and it doesn't serve them. And it's really, I don't have access to anything else.
Yeah.
But when I'm able to really know myself, because I love the visual that you used really early in the conversation about 4,000 masks and having like so many layers that you aren't even certain who you are.
Right.
The only way to get to the bottom of that is being curious about what's really there, and then like testing a layer and peeling a layer and testing a layer and peeling a layer. So you go to this course, you have this earth-shattering discovery, you come home, you announce to your community that Steve is showing up different, and they all go, oh yeah,
Sure.
sure, uh-huh.
Yep.
How did you make the transition? Because like, yeah, when you have the aha, it's really powerful. Most of us, myself at least, like don't have the, if I don't have the habit, if I don't have the support, if I don't have a structure, like how do you get from this chaos that I created to this Valhalla that I see in the distance?
Yeah. So that's a great question. This is a lot of fun. I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Mm.
So when I came back, I can visualize exactly what happened. I remember coming in the office because it was like Sunday night at like 1 a.m. My wife is asleep. We worked together, by the way. It was a neat dynamic. It was my office was here, Danielle's office was here, and my father-in-law's office. Like the walls separated us, just one wall. And I remember walking into her office and squatting down next to her and having a conversation with her because I need to have a conversation with her. And I remember her saying, I don't know who you are right now. And I was like, cool. It's actually kind of nice. I'm like, I said, I'm in a place of inventing myself, of the person that I am. And I'm just going to show up as that guy. So you've never met this person. I said, to be honest with you, I haven't seen him in almost 3 decades since I was a little kid. And I said, so let's see what happens here. And she says, how can you allow people to be mean to you and say the things that they say? Because she heard some of the stuff that was said to me, not necessarily by my in-laws, but some other people in my life. She's like, how can you sit there and go, it's okay to be spoken to like that? And I said, well, a couple reasons. One, most people have a really hard time expressing their feelings. So instead of saying, hey, you hurt my feelings, they'd rather dress you down and say, okay, now they know what I feel like, and then they're okay with it. That's where the passive aggressiveness comes in. And I said, and secondly, while I've created the environment for this to exist, It really has nothing to do with me. That's their self-express. That's how they're expressing themselves in the moment. And I said, so taking something personally, even if I'm being a jerk and somebody says you're being a jerk, it's their perception of who I am in the moment. I said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to need your help is I need to keep checking with myself. And I don't mind if you say, hey, you're being a jerk. I'm going to go, oh yeah, totally, man. Sorry about that. And then eventually what happened was I stuck to it because there was something I found out that was really strong in my life was my people pleasing. Like do you hear the contradiction between the passive aggressive and the people pleasing? It's so confusing, but both of them are originated from this massive insecurity that I had about myself. Like my passive aggressive was there, but I still needed you to like me. So I would do all these nice things, right? And so when I saw that I had that people pleasing in me, instead of just trying to eradicate it, I was like, you know what? I can use this in my favor. I can know when the people pleaser can come up. I can use the different characters that I've developed through my life of living, and I can use the characters when they're needed instead of them having to come out automatically. Instead of having a people pleaser pop up when I don't feel good about myself and I need somebody to like me back, I was like, you know what? That people pleaser is really handy. I'm going to use him to, and it was funny because it's now actually, it's a character trait that I've adopted as the person that I want to be. Just nice. I just want to be nice to people because everybody deserves to have some niceness in their life. So when I would see somebody upset or even like, because look, I'm just being honest with you, I fell off the wagon quite often. Something would pop back and be like, do you remember that thing I told you I was going to work on? Yep, I just blew it. So I'd like to ask for some grace in this moment. Do you guys mind if you give me a little grace here? I'd like to go back and restart that conversation. And so I was constantly in course correction, left and right, and being okay with if somebody was upset with me, being okay with it. You know, instead of having to defend myself, I could just be in the moment with them of upset and allow them to not feel wrong for it. Because they don't know what everybody knows, and neither do I. So, it's funny because there's something that I heard, and I will take this for as long as I can remember it, is that I wound up the way I wound up, which is great. Now, here's the funny thing. If I have to believe that, then also other people wound up the way they wound up. So how can I be a booger to them if they're just wound up that way? I'm trying to figure out how do I explain it? I put my empathy glasses on. That when people are being upset or angry or frustrated, to have empathy with them. I don't have sympathy at all, but lots of empathy though. So I walked into it that way. So when they were like, you did this, this, and this, I'm like, man, I totally did. I'm sorry how that impacted you. That's messed up. I get that. You should be angry at me. I would be angry at me too. And then they go, this is very confusing for me right now. Aren't you supposed to yell back?
Hang on just a second.
I want to yell back. That's the problem. That's the challenge that I was dealing with. Is I wanted to yell back. Everything in my body was like, come on, let's go. This is going to be fun. Let's make them wrong. And yipper. So yeah, the empathy classes.
That really, like what you're pointing to is key, because what I'm hearing is like the level of honesty. Like, you remember it's been a while, but do you remember the first time you drove a car?
I do.
You were like, you had to pay attention to everything that was going on.
I was so scared too.
Oh my gosh. And it's like, it's all so new that there's nothing that you can take for granted. And it sounds like this is a similar kind of a conversation. And so you've made this massive promise to these people, and there's nothing that you can do except just be hyper aware of where you said the line would be and where you were standing in relation to it, and then just request feedback.
Yeah.
And I think that it's powerful from the perspective of, Like course correction, you can't correct a course if you don't see that one exists.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like we float around like a leaf on the surface of a water and pretend that we're playing a game that we really aren't, because we have absolutely no direction. We've declared no vision and we're
Mm.
pretending, but basically the whole game is not to lose, but you haven't defined winning.
Oof. Man, that's awesome. I like it.
The other aspect of what I hear, which is really powerful, is for so long you were ignoring what other people had to say, because the number one priority when I'm in that kind of a lockdown is to make sure that I'm okay.
Hmm.
And when I give up needing me to be okay and I'm out here with you, and I can actually hear your concern when you say it and be with your concern, that's when people just really start to freak out, because how often does that happen, even with people who are well adjusted?
Yeah.
Because we're just all on different scales of, like you say, you reminding yourself that everybody else is automatically wound up where they automatically wound up and they don't even know it. You just might have been a little bit more tightly wound. And
Yeah.
that may not even necessarily be true. They just might be more socially acceptably wound.
Yeah.
So here we are. And here you are. That must have been really fulfilling. And I love that you're just really acknowledging that they were super confused.
It's like
So,
somebody stole me and replaced me with somebody else.
yeah, right? It's the pod people.
Right. It's funny.
What happened to Steve? I don't know. It's a cult.
Totally. The one that sends you home.
I don't know, but we like the new one better. So do we really want to
Yeah.
complain?
Let's stop talking about it. That's so funny.
Until they have to start being responsible because things aren't working.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You were saying in some cases it took about a year and a half, and in another case or two it took about 3 years. And now what?
So as the conversations continued to evolve, I took it on a personal mission to allow people to be themselves around me, like their authentic, caring, loving, giving selves. And I'm like, all right, so how do I do this? Who do I need to be for the people in my life? How can I do that? Like, what does this look like? And I'm a hugger. Like, I warn people all the time. I'm like, I'm coming in hot, whether you're a hugger or not. Like, that's just kind of what's happening right now. I'm like, you can be mad at me later. I shake your hand once, and that's it. And so there, I also know now there are a lot of people that don't like hugging. And so I was like, all right, so what would have people not like hugging? I was like, all right, so something happened somewhere where that's an unsafe zone. So I got it. So how can I create the safe zone in it? Now when I say I'm a hugger, like I'm a full hands reach, right? They overlap. And I have to be careful with that. Sometimes it's just a kind of one of those shoulder taps, right? And then that's where I start. There is a conversation that you're probably very familiar with around freedom of self-expression.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that. It didn't make any sense to me because I had my own definition of it that I just wasn't willing to let go of. And I'm like, because I'm expressing myself. That's freedom of self-expression. Well, that's not really. I'm just blowing out my opinion. That's what I'm doing, right? So when I started looking at it deeper, and I really hung out with it for like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months, just trying to make it make sense for me. And when I came up with it, it's like a wave pool. It's this ebb and flow of energy back and forth with words. And sometimes when you speak, it's that. And then, whoosh, right, there's a huge white cap. And then there's other times where it's like you can feel that happening. So I'm like, all right, so what's the difference in it? Is it me being either restrictive in my receiving, or am I being overbearing and blowing out my opinions? And so I started looking at that deeper, and I'm like, all right, so if freedom of self-expression is one of the key powers to great relationships, How do we create that? So it's I had to really pay attention, Aaron, to all of my wrongness and my badness and my judgments and all that fun stuff, and just take a look at it for what it is. And I decided one day to test myself. I'm like, let's see if I've got this. And I have a real close friend of mine. We think exactly the opposite politically. We're left, left, right, left, however we want to say it. So one day I'm sitting there, and we had never talked about politics. I knew, right? I'm like, I don't want to cross the line, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I really want to get to know him further. So I go, so tell me about your political views. That may have been the same face he made. He goes like, are you sure? He's like, we're the opposite, right? And I go, I do know we're the opposite, but I just like to know. And he talked and talked and talked, and I was like, interesting. Okay, got it. And I was paying attention to my wrongness and paying attention to my judgments, so I didn't, wasn't all over my face. And I was sitting there, and he goes, huh. So, and I go, cool. I get why you believe what you believe. I still have my own beliefs, but I totally get it. In fact, we're probably closer than you think. And he goes, huh. Tell me about your beliefs. And I go, are you sure? And he goes, I am. I'm like, all right. So I said, ask me questions because I'll be here for 17 days. So he starts asking me questions, and I told him, he goes, huh, that's interesting. I still believe what I believe, but I get why you believe what you believe. I'm like, awesome. And we became closer because we accepted each other for who we were in the moment. And that's being open and honest and vulnerable with each other without the concern of being told how bad or wrong or crazy or whatever stuff is being said today. And I sat back, and I gained a new respect for him because he was ready to have that conversation. And it was because I decided to put myself aside and just be with him as exactly who he is. And that was probably almost 5 years ago. That was because I didn't understand, you and I have some really cool experience together. We've had the opportunity to work together, and I was actually one of your understudies for a few days, which was pretty cool. And so what was neat about it, Aaron, was I didn't understand what we were doing until that moment. And I'm like, man, okay, I got it. So when I'm working with people, let's just be honest, you work with people too. Sometimes the things that come up, you're like, good Lord, where did you get that from? Like, man, you made that. That was a really, really powerfully made up story. And you just want to go, all right, so that's just crazy talk. So let's try again. That's my old self trying to come back out. But what I've decided to do is I'm like, do you mind if I repeat back what you just said to me? Yeah, sure. And I repeat it back. I'm like, what did you hear? Sounds like a made up story. I'm like, I kind of felt the same way. Well, what do we do? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want your story to be? And it's almost like it's such an interesting concept. Because wait a minute, hold on a second here. I can actually create my story? Yeah. Totally.
Well, but the truth of the matter is absolutely everything is a story.
Right.
It's all, regardless of whether it's right or wrong or true or false, it's all a story.
Mm-hmm.
Set of facts, we create a story about it. That's what human beings do.
Yep.
We're the only creatures that do it.
Yep, we're experts.
That we know of.
Yeah. Wow. I don't remember your original question again.
I don't even worry about it because the question isn't the point. It's the conversation that's the point. And this is absolute gold. So we've wandered a lot of different places in the little while that we've been together. Is there something that you would highlight or touch upon or anything in particular that you would like to leave our audience with?
Yeah. When something's upsetting me, I have to ask myself, what makes this matter so much? And where did I put the meaning into what makes that matter so much? And when I generally look at it, it's usually not the big of a deal as what I really created it to be. This is cool. I'll tell it in a story. When my door is shut, unless the house is on fire or somebody's bleeding and they have to go to the hospital, and that door doesn't open up. Because that means I'm on with somebody and we're having most likely they're pretty intense conversations. We're talking about life and vulnerability. It's sensitive. So that door, please do not open the door. If you really, really need me, text me a few times in a row so I'll hear my phone. And then I'll say, can you give me a moment? Somebody's losing their mind, right? And that doesn't happen. So you can hear how we've created such a powerful agreement that door never opens. So I'm sitting here, I'm on with a client, and we're having a deep conversation. And I hear the hand go on the knob. It was like slow motion. It was like click, click, and I'm like, oh, and like my mind left this conversation so quickly because I'm like, oh no. So I go, yes. I go, hold on. I mute myself. I go, yeah. Our youngest, he's 11 at the time. And he goes, can I have a snack? And I go, no, close the door. I unmuted myself and I sat there for about 5 seconds. He started talking again. I go, man, can you give me a moment? She's like, yeah, sure. I'm like, I need to clear up something real quick. She's like, okay. I muted myself again and I never left my chair. And she's looking at me like something's like, are you going to go? And it was clearing up myself. So I had to examine what just happened. Like I got fired up. Like I was this color red. Like my blood pressure went through the roof. And I'm like, that was really weird. I'm like, all right, so what happened? Well, a human being turned the knob, opened up an object, and spoke words. So what made that matter so much to me? There's a lot of meaning there because that anger, that was not appropriate to what happened. Here are my assumptions. And so I'm like, I got it. Disrespect. Hasn't shown up in a while. You don't disobey your parents. That's what I grew up. You don't my parents didn't beat us or anything like that, but we had a very powerful agreement of obeying. It's the world we lived in. So I sat there and I brought the teaching moment into it's like, you didn't go anywhere. I'm like, I know. It's because I was clearing myself. I was a maniac in my mind. I was getting ready to murder my 11-year-old son for crying out. I'm just kidding. I wasn't going to hit. We don't hit our kids either. And I was like ready to lose my mind. And she's like, well, what happened? And when I told her what happened, I said, it was really funny. When I was a kid, you didn't disrespect my parents because if you did, there was always a punishment. And the punishment wasn't a physical punishment. It was disappointment and anger. And I never got grounded. I always had to do stuff like dig ditches in the backyard or whatever. I had to dig a ditch and then I had to fill it back in. Like that was my punishment. That's how it was. When I can pull myself out of myself, like we observe, like you said, we're like this, right? We're observing life this way all the time. It's just like we're looking forward. So what I did in that moment was I observed myself observing what was going on. So I got to take a look at me. This is going to be a weird example, but it was like an out of body look at myself type of thing. But I don't do out of body experiences. But it was like I had to take a step back and see, look at that guy right there, get angry at an 11-year-old for opening the door and saying words. So what happened? So when I looked at it from that other perspective, I could see the meaning that I had put into him opening the door. Because first I panicked because I thought there was something, because bleeding or hospital or house burning down. Right. So that was there. And then what made it matter was the disrespect in it. In all reality, you think that 11-year-old kid who's a third of my size at the time wanted to go, I wonder how I can make my daddy mad today. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll interrupt one of his sessions. That'd be a perfect thing to do. Yeah. Let me do that right now. Right. Like, come on. So when I walk out the door, I go, hey, and he's right. He was right there. I don't know how long he'd been standing there, but he was right there. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I forgot. I know we made it. I'm like, it's kind of what I thought. And he goes, okay. And like, he had this fear.
Wow.
And I was like, so was there a certain snack you had in mind, or just say yes and just choose whatever you want? He goes, kind of wanted an Oreo cookie. I'm like, awesome, get 2. I go, can we reestablish our agreement? And he goes, yes. And that hasn't happened since. That was 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
That's awesome.
So what I love about your question is like, it opens up when we start looking at what makes things matter so much. What's the meaning that we have on them, and go, how long has that been mattering to me, and how long has this meaning been there, and how long has that been controlling my life?
Mm-hmm.
To the point where I don't even think I'm responsible in how I'm or I say responding. That's a programming. I don't even use react very much anymore. How I'm not even being responsible about how I'm reacting, because before all this stuff, I would have walked out that door and he would have been punished. He would have had everything taken away from him, and I would have yelled at him like a maniac. And all that would have done was made that young man fear his daddy.
Yeah. Wow.
So like what matters, where's the meaning coming from? And then can you be responsible for who you're being in the moment? Not blaming. I don't believe in blame. Like, I think we're both kind of there. Not really blame, but we're all responsible though, man. We have responsibility. And so, yeah, I think that right there is just kind of, and having some grace for people, because look, man, we all wound up how we all wound up. Like, I'm a booger sometimes. Other people are a booger sometimes. I want you to have grace for me, but nah, not so much for you though. We need to start kind of taking a look at that for a little bit here.
That's really, wow. An amazing way to wrap up a wonderful conversation. Really powerfully said. Thank you.
Awesome.
Steve, thank you for a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you and everything that you've brought to the space.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. And I again, I'm going to say it. This was really important to me. That it was important for you to message me and say, hey, would you be a guest? So thank you for that. And thank you for giving me the platform to hang out with you and to be with your audience and your family. My heart is so full right now, just a couple reasons to hang out together, and you giving me the honor and the privilege to be here with you. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Right on.
Thank you so much for watching another episode of The Secret of My Success, the podcast where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling life. I'm your host, Erin Curran. Until next time.